Okay, so welcome everyone to our third webinar of the series this week. My name is Akhil and I'm the co-founder of Green Story. We will be starting in about 30 seconds. I'm just waiting for the stragglers to kind of come in and then we'll kick things off. All right. Well, I think that's enough time. Let's just kick things off. People can catch up. So hi everyone. As I said, I'm Akhil. I'm the co-founder of Green Story, and welcome to the third of our webinar series on zeroing in on neutrality. The object of the series is to really showcase carbon offsetting from all angles and sharing each stakeholder's perspective. And we are very pleased today to host this great panel. There are five panelists who work with UN SDGs as the forefront of their business who will be joining us. If you have any questions, feel free to type them out in the question box or in the chat box, and we'll get to them after the discussion. If you want to take part in the discussion on social media channels, please tag us at Green Story Inc. That's basically the username across any social media channel that you might have. I'm not sure we're on Snapchat, but everything else will work. A little bit on Green Story. Our vision is to enable every consumer to ask, what's my impact, before they make a purchase. As a company, we work with brands ranging from startups to global giants to measure the impact of their supply chains and visualize it for our customers. You can see an example here on the left side with one of our clients in India, No Nasties. We recently launched our newest product, a carbon offsetting system that not only makes your products carbon neutral, but really involves and integrates the consumer into the process, so there's clear transparency and they can see where their money is going. And without any further ado, I would like to thank and introduce the amazing panel that's joining us today. And our moderator is Devin. Devin and his partner Tegan co-founded the Canvas by Carinthia to transform vacant spaces into hubs for social impact and empowerment. They believe in a slow fashion movement born out of a connected network of sustainability-focused businesses working together to stimulate progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals, which is the main focus of this panel. Devin is also the co-president of the Future Fashion Group at NYU, a university-wide club dedicated to raising awareness about fashion's impact on the environment. Before starting the Canvas, Devin worked at Milk Studios, Loeffler Randall, and Rochambeau. It's over to you, Devin.
Thank you so much, Akhil, and welcome everyone to this panel on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. These are the 17 largest challenges the world is facing right now, and Akhil and Green Story, thank you for the opportunity to speak about these with such an amazing group of panelists. And so I want to welcome right away Teague, my co-founder and co-CEO of the Canvas, Teague and Maxi, Miguel Naranjo, the program officer of the UN Climate Change Secretariat, and one of our panelists today, Lara Pizzato, the fashion tech and sustainability consultant fueled, and Ariel Crawford, an amazing brand who we are pleased to get to a lot on the agenda today. I want to give everyone a quick chance to. I think I may have cut out. I'm so sorry. Can everyone hear me? Everyone can hear me. Okay.
Loud and clear.
Sorry about that. So I'm not sure where I got cut out, but we're going to jump right into introductions, and we will start right at the top with you, Miguel. Please tell us about your work at the UNFCCC in Bonn and what your focus is, and then we're going to go Miguel, Lara, Ariel, and then Tegan. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Devin. So glad to be with you today, either in your morning or afternoon or wherever you are. As explained, I am a program officer with the Climate Change Secretariat, the United Nations Climate Change Secretariat, also known as the UNFCCC or UNFCCC Secretariat. So you have a choice of names to use. But as you probably know, the Secretariat, the main thing that we do is support the intergovernmental process on climate change. So support the negotiations and governments in following up with the agreements that they reach during those negotiations. Most recently, most importantly, the Paris Agreement. However, the governments who are our bosses, they have also asked us to work more with other stakeholders, private sector, academia, NGOs, everybody in society, to try to promote, facilitate as much as possible, and recognize those who are taking action on climate. And I am part of the team that tries to do that. So our engagement is more with everybody who is not a national government, and that's the reason why I'm joining you today. So thanks a lot.
Amazing. Lara, please.
Thanks, Evan, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. And thanks to Green Story for hosting us today. My name is Lara Pizzato. I run an agency called Fueled. I work with both startups and brands that are working in a sustainable fashion. So innovators that are really changing the way that we're doing things today in the industry. And on the other hand, the brands that are starting their sustainability journey. I've been working in innovation and with startups for around 10 years. And the past couple of years, I decided to focus only on fashion and see what was going on in the market. I started working in 2018 with Fashion for Good. I work with the accelerator program and the startups in the cohorts. And currently, I'm also working with Virgin Startup in their fashion tech vertical, sustainable fashion vertical, and as well as a sustainable accelerator. And and this is me. Thank you.
Thank you, Lara. Ariel, please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to Green Story for having us. I'm honored to be on this panel of industry experts today. My name is Ariel Crawford. I'm the founder and designer of Ariel, a sustainable apparel label designed and manufactured here in New York City and committed to regenerative materials, including organic, recycled, and byproduct. And we're also very involved in lobbying for climate action. So we are really using our platform for a greater mission, including climate solutions, as well as ethics of the industry, water pollution, etc. Basically, all of the SDGs are really our framework for how we operate.
Awesome. Thank you, Ariel. Tegan, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Thanks for moderating, Dev. I'm really looking forward to this. I run the Canvas by Carencia with Devin. We create a community of brands and innovators using the SDGs as a framework, turning vacant spaces in big cities into retail stores to give these brands and entrepreneurs access to direct-to-consumer interactions and access to these different markets.
Thanks, Steve. So I think we want to really set the stage today with a focus on goal number 13, and that is climate action. Miguel, you are based in Bonn. You are at the UN FCCC. Tegan and I had a chance to travel to Bonn a few years ago, so we're very familiar with all the work that you're doing and how important it is. And I think the most critical part of this ultimately is going to be carbon emissions and the way that we can curb them. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what it is that the UNFCCC is doing at this stage to try to work on that, and then fashion's role as you see it in making that happen.
Thanks a lot. Can you hear me okay? Just
Perfect.
let me know if something happens.
Will do.
All right. So thanks a lot. So as you mentioned, the Climate Change Secretariat focuses on SDG, or Sustainable Development Goal 13, which is climate action. However, as you all probably know, the 17 SDGs are all interconnected. So when you talk about action on one SDG, whatever you do will impact the others, and vice versa. They're all interconnected. And climate change is a very good example, right? If you want to curb emissions, as you were saying, Devin, you need to work on reducing emissions from agriculture. So you have to go and talk to the agriculture people, which means food, right? And food security and other topics, energy, right? So that also impacts the SDG on access to energy. I don't remember the name by by memory. Climate change is a topic that touches upon all others. Most importantly, for example, SDG 17, partnerships for the goals. We are not going to achieve a success against climate change without collaboration, without partnerships of all kinds across sectors in society, across countries. We do need to all work together. So climate change has that characteristic that everything that we do in society is related to it, right? It has an impact on climate. On top of that, you add the fact that climate action is really urgent. We have potentially less than 10 years left before we reach the 1.5 degrees Celsius target that we have set, which is no time, right? This is, we're talking about tomorrow. So you put those two things together, the urgency of climate action and the fact that everything that you do has an impact on climate, and then you realize why the topic of climate change is in everybody's mouth and mind these days. It's not because climate change is more important than preserving biodiversity or ensuring education and health for everyone in the world. It's just that it is possibly the most urgent of all. If we don't succeed in the face of climate change, all of the other SDGs will be lost as well. So that's why they focus on the topic. So what are we doing about it? Well, as I said, our role from the Climate Change Secretariat or the UNFCCC Secretariat is basically to support national governments in developing these international agreements to act on the face of climate change. But after that, the work comes from you. It comes from the governments. It comes from private sector. It's all of society that has to take action to try to align with the agreements or with the goals that have been agreed under the intergovernmental process that we lead. So basically, from our side, what we do is just try to ensure that intergovernmental process has the conditions to be successful, right? Support governments in creating this environment of trust and of urgency, providing recommendations when they ask for them, so that they can work together on addressing the topic. So now we have the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement tells us where we want to go, where we need to be. It doesn't tell you fully how to get there. And this is something that we need to work together to find out. Some of the key actions or the key achievements, the key goals, we know. We know what we need to do. We know what they are, but some of the details we still don't, right? How are we going to decarbonize so many of our industries? It's still a challenge. We still don't have all the answers, but we know we need to decarbonize them, or we need to find solutions to compensate for those emissions, right? So that we reach by 2050 what is being called net zero. So basically, we put as much greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere as we take out, right? Or as the planet is able to take out. So in total net, we are not contributing anymore to more global warming and more climate change. So we know we need to get there. Most of the work that we do today on the beyond the negotiations is trying to support industries to find out how to do that, to develop pathways to get there. Now, the other topic that you asked me to address was the carbon offsetting, right? Or the compensation of emissions. So let me mention two things about carbon offsetting. One, if we are going to reach net zero, we are going to need some kind of offsetting, some kind of compensation of emissions. As far as we know today, there is no way we are going to reach net zero as a society without a way to capture CO2 from the atmosphere, remove it from the atmosphere, because there are so many activities that we cannot imagine today will stop emitting greenhouse gases. I think about production of cement, production of steel, production of chemicals, even your breathing, although that's maybe too much. We produce a lot of emissions that we are not going to avoid. So what do? We have to capture them. We have to remove them from the atmosphere somehow. And that is the concept of compensation. So thinking about 2050 or earlier, if possible, we need to be removing from the atmosphere as much as we are putting in it. So we need to reduce emissions, and we need to develop the technologies to capture or to extract, to sequester emissions or carbon in this case from the atmosphere. So that capture or sequestration of CO2 that we will need to be doing is a way of compensation, right? The thing is, by 2050, we need to be doing it in a way that that carbon is permanently removed from the atmosphere. So, we take it out, it doesn't go back. So it can be carbon capture and storage, right? The storing the CO2 in geological formations for geological time frames, right? For a very, very long time, or some other technologies that hopefully we'll be able to develop that helps us also capture that CO2 and keep it there. And now, getting there is going to take some time. Right now, CCS, carbon capture and storage, is very expensive. Technologies for direct capture of CO2 from the atmosphere are also just being developed and are also very, very expensive and in experimental stages. So right now, there is no possibility to do that, right? It is not feasible yet. So what do we do with the emissions that we have right now? So we try to reduce them and avoid them as much as we can, right? We have to use more renewable energy. We have to electrify transportation from those renewable sources. We have to avoid emissions from the waste that we generate, reduce, of course, enormously the amount of waste that we generate, which is ridiculous these days. We have to avoid deforestation and grow natural areas. We have to do all of that. However, there will still be some emissions that we are producing in the meantime. What do you do with those? You can either do nothing. So I tried to do my best and I couldn't avoid these ones, or you can compensate them. And this compensation is considered a contribution to reducing emissions somewhere else, right? You were not able to reduce those emissions. So in order to kind of make up for it, to compensate for it, you provide financial support to projects that reduce emissions where it is possible to still reduce them,
Right.
but where those reductions would not be possible without that contribution, the financial contribution. That's called additionality of these projects, if you want to know the technical term. So when you do the offsetting, you're not actually compensating, not really for your emissions, right? The emissions that you put out there will be there until someone takes them out, right? So you are not really compensating for the damage created, but what you're doing is dedicating some resources to trying to avoid emissions somewhere else. This can be done by those who have the extra resources to do it, right? Not everybody in the world has the resources to put into that, but those of us that can, then we can go ahead and compensate our emissions by supporting further emission reductions elsewhere.
Sure.
The benefit of that is it accelerates the transition to a low carbon society through these projects, and potentially also brings other sustainable development benefits associated with the SDGs to the countries where they are. So it's a double win situation: reduce emissions and bring other sustainable development benefits. And that's the rationale behind promoting the use of carbon offsets. It's not really that you pay for your sin of polluting the atmosphere, is that you take an additional action to try to help reduce emissions globally.
Right. Miguel, when I think of the UNFCCC as a entity and the role it has in carbon emissions, and then we look to fashion, what is the entity that would play that same role of keeping and holding brands and individuals and consumers responsible? I think of Fashion for Good. And Lara, having spent many years there and now at Fueled, as founder of Fueled, looking at the way that brands operate and the way that individuals are making decisions on a day-to-day basis, I see a sort of commonality between the work that you're doing, Miguel, and Lara, you more specifically in fashion. How do you see that responsibility both in Fashion for Good with your time there and now at Fueled?
Okay, so the first thing that I like to point out, the technology and innovation apart, is how actually we deliver this message to the consumer. So because there's only one part that the fashion industry can be doing right. So if the reputation right now is the second most polluting industry in the world, which is, that can be right or not. It's pointing the finger at an industry where we're all kind of contributing to. So I think there's one side of things that is really looking at, okay, this is the fashion industry, but what can I do as a consumer since I'm part of it and I'm fueling this all the time? And on the other hand, there's really looking at technology and how we can help this transition and this transformation of the industry. I think that really in terms of the offsetting, this is something that consumers still are quite confused about, really into, what it really means and what it can do for them. And this is kind of like on the brands, on the lack of transparency into it, and really explaining consumers where this is going and what it really means for them in terms of, there's a lot of brands that are doing great work in terms of calculating the footprint. I'm thinking of Allbirds, ThreadUp, and then there's New Wardrobe, another platform that allows the swapping of clothing between different people in the community, that also allows you to calculate your impact and offset it at the same time. So I'm thinking there are all these tools out there, but they're still staying with some of the companies that are really making the difference. But how do we reach all of them? And as far as the concerns of fashion for good, from what I'm seeing, the majority of the fashion's carbon footprint is really on the upstream supply chain stages. So we're looking at the raw material production and processing. So there's really a strong focus on these companies that are making the difference today, like a Hydro Cotton, that are growing sustainable cotton in a very transparent way, and they're helping reducing the use of water and fertilizer by 80%. Another company called Gali that produces cotton in a lab. So there's really a focus into, rather than offsetting, how do we look at this in the future to avoid it? So I think that it's a two-way thing. So how do we interact with consumers to actually educate them into, their footprint and how to act upon it? And on the other hand, how do we create new technologies that can help us, not offsetting, but really creating a different, creating a different way of doing things. So this is what I'm seeing on both sides. And again, I think that the responsibility, again, has to go to not only to the brands or the big players, but to the consumers. Just by looking at returns, we know that 30% of stuff bought online, especially now we're seeing it with COVID even more, is returned. When it comes to denim, it goes up to 70%. So where is the consumer in all this? So how can we get this information out there to them to really understand the impact of everything that we do? So this is where I come from, both on the side of the education of the consumer, really looking at the technology that is making the difference in the future. Then I think brands always have a choice to be, okay, what are the quick wins that we can take in this moment to create the more transparency, because it comes down to that, in the end. And at the same time is looking at 5 to 10, 20 years from now, what kind of difference do we want to create into the world? So I think that that's where Fashion for Good is really put in, really the focus.
Thank you. And specifically when it comes to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, how do you see progress so far? And do you think there's enough focus in the fashion industry specifically on these goals, or is it still too vague to you?
I think that we can obviously do better. The problem is that I think it's a great frame to start from, but there's always room for improvement. Why don't we start from there and then look at the future in what we can do better? But it's a really great starting point, but not that many brands are waking up. I think COVID has shaken the industry quite a lot into, this is urgent, this is what we need to do. But I think that the catch up is still pretty slow compared to what we would be supposed to be doing. I see a lot of brands that are still struggling with understanding what sustainability means to them. So that's also part of my work, because sometimes just look at the big scheme of things, and there's so much that we can do, but at the same time, resources are limited for companies as well as their knowledge and understanding. So just really picking up on what your priorities are that are aligned with the framework. And what are the things where you can really make the difference today and in the next couple of years, rather than thinking, I need to revolutionize the entire business. So I think that that's where we're coming from, because if there are, 3 types of businesses that we're looking at, the big groups that are moving quite quickly, like the caring of the situation, the small brands that are born today, that there are sustainable already, but there is a massive amount of brands in the middle that are kind of, they don't know what they're doing. Like they struggle to understand it because of the limited resources that they have. And in the end, there's still a business. So there's a lot of more work that has to be done. But we have, really great examples. Like I always think of Allbirds and how they do things, or Everlane in terms of transparency. We have really great examples, but it's hard to catch up. I hope that, and I'm sure that technology could really make the difference if there was more opening from the fashion industry to it. And I think that there's a bit of a gap between the two of them, technology and fashion.
Right. Thank you so much. I think that's a great transition to you, Ariel. I think to say that you run a brand would be quite an understatement. You're a lobbyist. You are addressing many of the sustainable development goals with your work, and you are quite literally trying to tackle the carbon offset problem as a fashion brand. So what is the difference between your brand and the brands of the world that do not see the opportunity to change things as a brand, as a practicing fashion designer?
Thank you, Devin. Yeah, I guess I just feel like assuming responsibility for at least myself and my consumers, and for my output into the world, and really encouraging the consumer to take on and to share some of that responsibility as well. There's a lot of critique about conscious consumerism. That it puts the blame on the consumer, and that certainly is not our intent. But it's just really waking up the consumer to say, you have a choice, and your choice has an infinite ripple effect into the world. When you press purchase, what does that put into action? And just encouraging the consumer to have more curiosity around that, and not to feel guilt or shame about that. That might be part of the process of transitioning to a more sustainable lifestyle, but to get over that pretty quickly, and then to just be curious about what you're setting in action as a consumer. And so a lot of my platform does involve consumer education and awareness. I really do believe that we're not evil, we're just uneducated or unaware about what's really happening. And so taking more responsibility for that certainly helps us make some of the right decisions when it comes to fashion.
And when we think about how a brand can actually tangibly address these goals, what is your approach? And when did you hear about the goals as well? I think something we often try to think about at the Canvas is how to introduce them appropriately, both to brands and consumers, and do it in a way where they can sort of fully comprehend it, and then leave with an understanding of what these goals represent on a larger scale to governments, to individuals, and then how to actually go about addressing them. So when did you first hear about them, and how did you go about addressing them?
Yeah, I think it is that zooming out effect of looking at the bigger picture. Personally, I'm a zero waster, and I felt a lot of frustration as a business owner and a zero waster around I'm not doing enough, or I'm working too far downstream, which is when I got into lobbying, which is when I really started to apply the SDGs to my business. I'm always looking for these helpful frameworks that are common metrics for how we can talk about sustainability, because greenwashing and woke washing is a real problem in the fashion industry. And carbon offsetting is one solution. I do offer that to my consumers. I work with a company called Future Neutral and allow my consumers to offset their carbon at the time of purchase. But I also see it as a greenwashing technique in the fashion industry, especially come Fashion Week. Everyone's saying that their show is carbon neutral, and it's done alone by carbon offsetting. And carbon offsetting alone will not get us to keep the world below 1.5 degrees of warming. The only way to meet the UN's 2050 carbon neutral goals will be through direct reduction of emissions. And so climate lobbying has become a big passion of mine. I work with the CCL, the Citizens Climate Lobby, and I'm just now leading up a new initiative. It's called FIAT, or the Fashion Industry Action Team, and we're basically incentivizing the fashion industry to get behind climate solutions, specifically a carbon tax and dividend, which we see as one of the most viable way forward to put the responsibility on the biggest carbon emitters and then return the dividends to the taxpayer.
Wow, amazing! Thank you, Ariel. As we prepared for this panel, we went back and just looked through your application that all brands at the Canvas are required to fill out as it pertains to the SDGs. And I saw you wrote that fabric is skincare. And I think that's a really good segue into just bringing this back to the Sustainable Development Goals and the scope of it. Teague, I want to ask you at the Canvas and in your perspective, we often talk about the context of sustainability and what it means for individual brands to tackle sustainability in their own way. How do you see that for our business when we are dealing with dozens of brands on a daily basis? We have brands that are making with leather. We have brands that are making with vegan leather in Amsterdam. Why is the context of sustainability important?
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting framework for a industry like fashion that has so many different approaches and ideas, and it's such a creative industry. I think when it comes to the SDGs and how brands address them and how we look at it, I think about the mission statement of one of our brands, which is to shake the world in a gentle way. And I think the SDGs really allow for that. One of the key focuses, I think, in my mind, is that goal number 17 of the partnerships for the goals. And I think that at the Canvas, what we do, all of our tags, I actually have one with me, they all show the SDGs that the brands address. And we pre-check goal number 17 on every tag, because simply by being a part of the Canvas, you are addressing at least one of the goals. You are joining into a partnership to find solutions. And that's really where it starts and ultimately where it ends, right? It is groups of people, groups of businesses, groups of brands coming together and saying, we are going to partner, we're going to collaborate to come up with creative solutions to these big problems. And that same brand that actually uses the mission statement of shake the world in a gentle way references a lot of quote by Maya Angelou, I believe, which is to do the best you can with what you know. And when you know better, to do better. And I think that's another area where the SDGs really create a pathway for growth, because you can be exposed to the SDGs through one of the goals, through a desire to address climate action, through a desire to address issues of poverty and lack of education. And once you get into one of these goals, once you start to look at it and learn about this framework, you learn more, and you're continuously learning more, because each one of these goals lends itself to the success of all of the other goals. So I think as far as sustainability and the SDGs and kind of how they play into fashion and what we do at the Canvas, it is ultimately a framework for partnerships, for collaboration, and for creatively coming up with solutions.
Thank you, T. I'd like to get everyone's thoughts on the following. When I think of the Paris Agreement and I think of the fashion industry today, there's this common thread of actors that perhaps are putting on a face and presenting themselves in ways that are very different than reality would suggest. And starting with you, Miguel, some of the countries that have either agreed to the goals and are not following through or have pulled out altogether, very unfortunately, for now at least. As we know, how do you sort of separate the ones that are taking it very seriously, the ones that have a lot of work to do but still want to do it, and the ones that have no regard for it? And then how do you make progress by bringing them all together? And I'd ask you this, Miguel, in the context of the UNFCCC, and Lara, Ariel, and Tegan, answer this however you'd like, but specifically when it comes to fashion brands and intentions in that case. Miguel, please.
Thank you. So the response from the UNFCCC side is probably a little bit diplomatic, no? The Secretariat, the United Nations system, doesn't have the role of policing the national governments or forcing them to do anything, right? This is a system where each government, each nation is sovereign, and they have the right to make whatever decisions they consider best. Now, the system, in case of the Paris Agreement and the UN SDG, works more on the basis of collaboration and maybe a little bit of peer pressure. So we don't put governments in groups of these are the ones doing great and these are doing really bad and these ones don't care, but rather we have to try to work with all of them, regardless of what position they currently hold. We have to try to work with all of them. As I said from the beginning, if we don't do this all together, we won't do it. We will all be facing failure. So the key here is to try to work as much as possible with those who are willing to collaborate. The ones that are not willing to collaborate right now or are not doing the best, there are other ways to address them. And there's a little bit the peer pressure. There is the pressure from citizens. There is the pressure from companies that are leaders, and from other society sectors. These are the ones who have to put some, or to give them some encouragement to try to align with the best practice in climate action. From our side, what we try to do is provide advice and also showcase those who are doing better as a way to encourage the others to do the same. But again, our role is more facilitative, more convening than policing or punishing. If you go down that way, collaboration breaks down very fast. So you have to really work on the convening, on the facilitating aspect of working with the governments. I don't know if that answers your question to satisfaction.
It certainly does. And I would ask one quick follow-up. Should climate science be politicized? Is it fair that it is, given the amount of considerations that do end up having national impacts, or should it be completely separate?
This is my personal opinion, right? This, from a personal point of view, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be politicized. Science is science. There is a process that is followed to come to conclusions. Those conclusions don't depend on opinions. Therefore, it shouldn't be politicized. But again, this is a personal opinion.
Thank you, Miguel. Lara, please.
So I think that when it comes to brands and when it comes to consumers and really understanding what brands are doing to put the people and planet first, that there's only one way that works well in the long term, and it's transparency. There are so many different strategies that brands can use, like really in terms of greenwashing or marketing strategy, to talk about their initiatives and everything. But there's only one thing that matters and consumers want, and that's transparency. There is no other, there's nothing else, right? Because then it's up to the consumer to judge, okay, do I want to, you vote with every dollar, right? So do I want to engage with this brand and actually support this company that has been doing this and that? Yes or no? And only that is the decision that can be made through transparency, and transparency for the consumer. I think that it's quite dangerous, really when it comes to, when we think about fashion brands and you decided to do, a sustainable capsule collection, it's kind of tricky for the consumer because they're very confused about understanding if a brand is really sustainable or not. They're like, okay, so you just did this really cool thing, but that's just 1% of your collection. What kind of company are you? Are you a sustainable company or you're not? And I think that that's where really being transparent and authentic and talk about that, where you are today and where you want to go in the future, what your vision is, could really help all the consumers, but also brands to be in a better spot, so they don't get that finger pointed to and claiming of greenwashing and everything, when sometimes there are really good intentions. I look at strategy in two ways. So what can we do in the short term to accelerate this transformation and change for our company and for the industry itself, and what can we do in the long term, as long as we're transparent about the end goal, and we just make sure that using technology that we showcase that and we give it to the consumers. I think that brands are in a good place. But if they don't, they just leave a doubt, and that doubt most of the times is a negative perception of the brand.
Thank you, Lara. And Ariel, I want to use that as a jumping point to your brand. Also hearing your answer on this question, but if you would be comfortable, what is something that you've come up against in this journey that has been difficult for you to improve on as an independent designer? I think that example, whatever it might be, if you would share it with us, would be indicative of a larger problem, in that it takes more than one designer, one person, one brand to break through those blockades. Ariel, I think you're on mute. Sorry. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you. Sustainability is, I think we all need to accept its complexity. And I think we all want a really simple answer, both as brands and consumers. But the truth is we don't have that. And I don't know that we're going to have that because it is so complex. And so I really encourage consumers always to dig deeper. And I'll mirror what Lara said about transparency. That can say a lot about what's going on behind the brand. And if they can't provide that, then it's probably greenwashing. And then the other pillars for me are definitely ethical labor and regenerative materials. And so I'll use that as an example. I use a fabric called milk fabric, and it's made from 100% spoiled milk, which is runoff from organic dairy farms. They ferment it and spin it into a fiber. So it's completely zero waste. It requires no additional water, chemicals, dyes, no new materials. And yet I get slammed by consumers, vegans, for this material. I'm a vegetarian. I'm totally on board with their mission, but vegan is often used as a greenwashing term in fashion, and it really allows synthetic materials to come through because synthetics are vegan if you look at them in a certain aspect of the supply chain. If you look at their lifespan in their entirety, they are not vegan. We continue to see pictures of whales washed ashore and birds washed ashore with their stomachs full of plastic. And so can we really say that plastic is even vegan? So it really does require a deeper digging and really embracing the gray area. And so other challenges for me have certainly been scaling. How do I scale in a way that, or does that become, as soon as I start using GOTS certified organic cotton on large scale, is it sustainable anymore? And so that's definitely come into question as well as local manufacturing. I manufacture locally, and I really enjoy that because I can provide transparency to my consumer. I work with my factory personally on a day-to-day basis, and I really enjoy that. But then when it comes to scaling, how do I continue to justify my fair trade price point to a consumer that wants something that is used to the prices that we've seen since the 90s of fashion being so devalued? We currently spend less, the same amount on fashion as our grandparents, but like for probably 30 times the pieces. And so it's just really been devalued. And so another challenge is revaluing apparel and knowing that it's skilled labor and that these materials are very resource expensive. And so it's really, the consumer does need to sort of share the responsibility of buying into less but better. And brands doing that as well, not churning out 6 seasons a year, and instead focusing on capsule collections and maybe one of something that does everything. And it's interesting to be in a consumer business where I'm also kind of saying, like, don't buy anything. So there's a happy medium, because certainly if you can't afford sustainable fashion, then secondhand and then it is also a great option. And then when you're ready to buy something new, just buy one of something, and buy something that you really love and something that you share the story and you share the mission, and continuing to incentivize these small brands that are incentivizing a regenerative supply chain is a great way forward.
Thank you, Ariel. Teague, we have these conversations all the time about price points, how to create a situation where people understand why something costs what it costs. So here, experience.
I think we lost Devin. I don't know if Tegan did.
I was wondering if it was just me. No.
Good. So in the meantime, I don't know if we take questions.
I can answer the question.
Yes, please go ahead. If you got it, yes.
I didn't hear much of the second part of what he was saying, but the initial question that he asked about greenwashing and kind of more high profile people and businesses starting to do things. Laura, I think there doesn't need to be much else said after you spoke. I think you really covered all the points. It's really about being transparent and really just being honest. I think there is there's a push for perfection when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to driving change. And I think that push for perfection is often to the detriment of the overall movement. I think that one of the things that we all have to acknowledge, no matter what you believe, that if it's that, you have to be 100% vegan in what it means right this second, even if it means down the line there will be more consequences. Whatever you believe, you have to understand that there is not a perfect solution right now. And there may never be a perfect solution to all of these problems, whether it's fashion or energy or transportation, whatever it is a work in progress. And the worst thing that we can do is look at someone who is making an attempt, who is trying, who is dipping their toes in the sustainability pool, if you will. And if we say, that's not enough, you have to be 100% or you aren't invited to this party, then we're limiting ourselves. We're putting this conversation into a silo that means that our impact is so diminished that it's not even worth doing what we're doing. And so I think the biggest thing, the key point of how we move from where we are right now to where we want to be is inclusivity. We have to invite everyone to have this conversation, whether they agree with us or not. We have to invite everyone to have this conversation, whether they are one of the top polluters or absolutely zero waste, carbon neutral. Everyone has to be a part of this conversation because it's not going to be one brand. It's not going to be one business. Even if it's H&M or Caring, they're not going to be able to do it on their own. And so everyone has to be a part of the conversation. And I think that that's really the area where sustainability and sustainable fashion loses people because it feels exclusive. And I think that happens mostly from this kind of die-hard call-out culture. And I think that the best thing that we can do as innovators, as entrepreneurs, as people pushing for this kind of change, is to just be open to having this conversation with everyone, and for saying good job for that one-off collection that a big company does that is sustainable, while still being able to criticize them for the ways that they are not sustainable. But if we can't acknowledge the good things that people are doing, they'll stop doing them.
Excellent point, T. Thank you. We have about 11 minutes for questions, and I want to make sure our audience gets a chance to chip in and hear from everyone. We're going to start with Sebastian Vivacqua for Miguel. If everyone can keep their answer to 1 to 2 minutes, I know it's tough. As we acknowledged before, this is among the most complicated and complex material that the world could have a debate about. But for Miguel, will there ever be legislations that forces every business on the planet to ensure that any resource taken from the planet must be returned via offsetting and so on? We are down to 35% of wilderness left. So I wonder how much more does the world need to wait to take serious actions?
Thank you. I think the frustration that the question, or the urgency and potentially the frustration that the question reflects, is something that many of us share, right? We want to see faster action and faster or clearer response from governments and from companies, from every actor in society. Now, to answer the question more directly, of course, I cannot say if there will be legislation anytime along those lines. Once again, from our side, national governments are sovereign. It's their decision how they address these issues. If they decide to put in place legislation of some kind, it's up to them. It's up to the processes that they have in-house. From the intergovernmental side, the negotiation side, what you usually arrive at is goals. This like the SDGs, like the Paris Agreement, that tell you where we need to go and by when, where we need to get to and by when. But exactly how to get there, it's up to national governments. And a little bit along the lines that Tegan was just mentioning, you cannot apply the same solution to everyone across the board. The solutions are not the same for all of us. So you have to give flexibility to the governments to try to address these issues, in the way that they think is best. Legislation is one of them, but it's one among several options, and it's not easy to say how they are going to evolve into the future. What I would expect is that legislation is going to become tougher and tougher, yes, in environmental and other issues. However, how soon and will it be on time? Of course, I unfortunately cannot say, but I think we can count on the legislation getting more or tougher as time goes by. Yeah.
Thank you, Miguel. And for Lara, Ariel, and Tegan, I think this question is great to hear from all of you on. How should a small brand communicate their greenness? Their effort will be drowned out by big corporations with big budgets, be it greenwashing or real. And then it was also followed by, this effort will be drowned out by all other messages, which I think is important because fashion often does live, Teague, you mentioned, in that silo where it's put off as an industry that doesn't have the impact that many people are now realizing that it does. So how do we integrate fashion into this conversation and realize this needs to be a part of the solution? Laura, if you could start us off, please.
So I think that when it comes to, if you're doing things properly, you're a sustainable brand, that should be always part of your narrative and being one of your pillars, and just be integrated as part of your mission and part of your vision and part of your values. So by working on your brand and really working on these core elements, what is the narrative that comes out of it? What is the sustainability aspect? Is it in your fabric? Is it in the way the logistics? Is it in using the local community? Depending on what it is, I would always try to stick to that story and trying to repeat it as much as I can, because then in the end, that's how you make your brand memorable. To be fair, I wouldn't be too concerned about the big corporations, because that's a whole other thing. You are who you are, and your brand is what it is. So just celebrate that and just really focus on getting the same messaging out over and over, and then making sure that it's aligned across all the platforms that you're on, and like starting from your e-commerce to your social media and to your blog, and even the way that you talk about your brand. So I think that's where you can really have an impact there.
Thank you, Lara. Ariel, please.
Yeah, I think it is about trusting the long game and knowing that some of these bigger brands, like when H&M comes out with their sustainable collection, that's not in competition with me. And so I know who my customer is, and it definitely the issues with the algorithm are real. I'm definitely not being seen. There's some suppression of these messages that are challenging the status quo. And there's loopholes and ways around it, and definitely I think in order to get more credibility in sustainability and fashion, we do need to line up with science. We do need to line up with policy. We do need to make sure our numbers are right. There is this statistic out there that fashion is the second most polluting industry. It's not right. It's not far off, but it's also not right. And so we need to understand the impact of our industry better and be able to communicate that, because what everyone here has in common is that we're all wearing clothes. No one is exempt from participating in this conversation. And the impact is massive. Even if it's not second, it is massive. And so we all need to sort of, take responsibility for what we're wearing and start to line up with people outside of fashion, so that we can really have a broader range of audience on this message. And that's why I love the conversation around bringing in the SDGs and the UN into these conversations around fashion and sustainability, so that we can really start to make an impact in our industry.
Thank you, Ariel. And Teague, both on a personal level and then as it pertains to the canvas and our process, how would you say what resonates most with you personally, and for our assessment, what do you think is most productive ultimately?
I think I love that you just mentioned that, everyone wears clothes. It reminded me of something that one of our colleagues did. She was giving a talk to a big audience, and she goes out on the stage and she was like, so who here is wearing clothes right now? And obviously everyone raises their hand, right? We're all a part of this. We all contribute. And it's a really, I think, humbling thing to think about, is that there's absolutely no way to not contribute in some way to the problems that fashion is facing, because we all have to wear clothes every day. If we decided not to, we would most likely get arrested. And it's a reality of life. I think as far as how a small brand communicates what they're doing is, your audience, right? If you are a brand in Brooklyn doing this, and the market that you are trying to reach as you get started and as you're growing is that market in Brooklyn, then you have to know what people in Brooklyn want. You have to know what they're looking for, and you have to know what they care about. I think one of the biggest issues with climate change, with how we address it and how we approach it, is that it's not real for everyone in the same way, right? I grew up on a very small island in the Bahamas, and I have watched my home change dramatically over the last 20 years. I have watched reefs disappear. I can put my feet in the water sitting on my dock at high tide now. It's these little things where it's very, very real for me. And so I care about it with all of my heart. I'm literally watching my home disappear. And it's something that doesn't exist for someone who lives in the middle of America in the same way. And so what I mean by know your audience is know what aspect of this is going to speak to them. And if you can speak directly to the concerns of your audience, you will not only have success in people understanding what you're doing and why, but you will build a level of customer loyalty that cannot be replicated by a large brand. And so in that way, a small business that knows their audience well, that is creating urgency for their audience, has a massive advantage over the bigger businesses. And we get these applications from brands to join the canvas, and they tell us how they address the goals. And I think one of the things that I look for is, how are you addressing this for your local community? In what way are you bringing this home? Because I think that that's where most of the inspiration, that's where the desire and the work comes from, is how does this matter to you, and why does it matter to you? And if it truly matters to you, that comes through in the way that you address it and the way that you present that. And so I think, I use this word a lot, but I really think the secret weapon of small brands and sustainable brands and ethical brands is earnestness. The best we can do to get people to buy into what we are doing is to be as genuinely earnest in the urgency that we feel, in the fear that we feel, in the sadness that we feel, that these things are even things that we have to talk about, as if they are not just responsibly, because we are humans on this planet.
Thank you, Teague. Inspiring. Akil, I know we're down to our final moments here. Do we have another 30 seconds?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. So we have a question from Mamta Jain regarding Indian companies, any collaboration with Indian companies. Rather than jump into this now, because I would much rather be able to have Mamta take that question offline. Is there anyone on the panel that can speak to that and would be willing to? Mamta, I think you'll actually be able to look at the people drop down and see everyone's email. So between Ariel, Lara, Miguel, the answer for Tegan and I is actually yes. So please feel free to reach out to us. But please, Lara, Ariel, and Miguel, if you could just give a thumbs up if the answer is yes to that. Awesome. So for Mamta, Miguel and Akil can both speak to that a bit further offline. And then finally, Miguel, we had one more question we didn't get to, and I just want to get if you could do a 10-second wrap up, your thoughts on the future of biomass.
Of biomass?
Of biomass, from Sebastian again.
General thoughts on biomass.
General thoughts on it's a big question.
So it's very generic.
Yes.
Biomass, I like it. Is that enough? No. No, just to say that, what can I say? Biomass, it's a resource that we probably are not using well today, as with so many others. Big opportunities there to increase the efficiency and how we use it. Not the silver bullet for climate change, definitely, but one of the elements that can help us. Yeah, very generic question for a generic, answer for a question.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I'd like to thank you, Miguel, Tegan, Ariel, and Lara for joining us for this great conversation today, and for Michelle and Akil from Green Story for organizing this, and a week of great conversations that I personally look forward to listening to as well. So thank you all, and have a great week, and stay safe.
That's awesome. Thank you, Devin. That is really nice. And what a conversation it was. I loved how engaged the audience was, and there was a lot of gray in it as well. So thank you to everyone in the panel, and thank you to the amazing audience for coming in, all your questions. Now there's a few more questions that we couldn't get to today. So as Devin said, you can all reach out to us, or just keep an eye out on social media. We will be reaching out via newsletters and our social media. And there are two really interesting topics that came up today. One was about brands, especially on how they're going to communicate the impact. There's some great answers, but we also do have a brand panel tomorrow, which is going to talk about this a lot. So if anyone here is specifically interested in that, please do attend that. And to your point, Tegan, I loved your point about saying how sustainability affects everyone, and the climate change affects everyone in different ways. And we are going to have kind of an all hands panel on Friday with people from many different walks of life, from brands to developers to just everyday folks, talking about this stuff. So that's on Friday. So really looking forward to both those panels, because we will be continuing this discussion. So couple of housekeeping notes. We will be setting up a summary blog on our website about all of this, along with the video email, and that will be emailed to all of you as well. So thank you again, and looking forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.